Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, July 22nd, 2024. All right, so the big news from the weekend, well, besides Biden dropping out of the presidential race and endorsing Kamala Harris, obviously that's what is taking up all the headlines now, a pretty big piece of news. But the biggest foreign policy story was early Friday morning, the Houthis got a drone through Israeli air defenses that hit Tel Aviv, killed one person, wounded a few more, and Israel responded with airstrikes on Yemen that hit the Red Sea port of Hodeidah, targeted a fuel depot, big fire, and now the Houthis are saying that they will, they're going to have a big response and that they're going to escalate and that they are happy to be in this direct confrontation with Israel. So on Sunday, Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi said Yemenis were pleased to be in a direct confrontation with Israel and vowed to hit back hard at the Israeli bombing of Yemen's Red Sea port of Hodeidah. He said, quote, Yemeni people are pleased to be in direct confrontation with the Israeli enemy, and they are steadfast and brave people, end quote. So this is something, he said something very similar when the U.S. and the UK started bombing Yemen back in January. He said it's a blessing to be in a direct confrontation with the U.S. and the UK. Israel bombed fuel depots in Hodeidah on Saturday following the Houthi drone attack. Yemeni health authorities said the Israeli strikes killed at least 6 people and wounded 83, many with severe burns, as the attack caused a massive fire. Al-Houthi said that Israel's attack was aimed at Yemen's economy since the port of Hodeidah is a vital entry point for fuel and humanitarian aid. Since 2015, Yemen has been under a U.S.-backed Saudi blockade, including the port of Hodeidah. That was kind of the main blockade. Now, this has been eased. As far as I understand, it has not been fully lifted. There are still restrictions. But so this is going to kind of exacerbate the situation for the ordinary Yemeni civilians who live in Houthi-controlled areas, who faced famine under the Saudi siege, who've just, kind of started recovering from it when the U.S. started that bombing campaign in January, and now we see Israel bombing this fuel depot, certainly going to affect the price of fuel in the country, which is how they need fuel to deliver aid and food. So al-Houthi noted that the U.S. and British bombing campaign in Yemen had done nothing to deter Houthi attacks on Israel-linked and other commercial shipping in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and beyond. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, have made clear they would only end their attacks if Israel's genocidal siege on Gaza came to an end. Also on Sunday, the Houthi military spokesman Yahya Sarriah said Yemen's, quote, response to the Israeli aggression against our country is inevitable, coming and will be huge, end quote. So Israeli officials said that there was a missile fired from Yemen towards the Israeli port of Eilat. That was Eilat, E-I-L-A-T. I always forget how to pronounce that. Eilat, I think. But they said that missile had been intercepted. Over the past 9 months, the Houthis have fired hundreds of drones and missiles toward Israel, but most were intercepted by U.S. warships in the Red Sea. Some landed, but didn't cause any damage. So this was the first one that caused a fatality. So the attack on Tel Aviv was notable since it was a longer range than other attacks. Israeli officials said that the drone traveled through Egypt and targeted Tel Aviv from the Mediterranean Sea. The Israeli airstrikes on Yemen were also a first time Israel bombed Yemen. An initial report said the attack was supported by the U.S. and the UK, but the Israeli military insisted that it carried out the strike on its own. I'm sure they got some kind of support from the U.S., intelligence or whatever. I assume that the U.S. might have refueled their planes because that's a long way for the Israeli jets to go. But they're saying they refueled themselves. And Israeli media has portrayed the attack as a major victory for Israel since it struck targets that were further away than Tehran, further away than the Iranian capital. It's always been a question of if Israel can actually pull off bombing Iran. So that's how Israeli media is kind of portraying this. But, the Houthis are expected to be emboldened by the strikes. This is what we figured would happen when the U.S. and the U.K. started bombing them, and they certainly have escalated, really escalated in response to that. And they're saying they're going to escalate even more. And this is kind of even the mainstream, like some new, analysts are basically saying that, yeah, this is, the Houthis are just going to step things up. They're portraying themselves as kind of, one of the only Arab countries that's sticking up for the Palestinians in Gaza. And, this seems to be what they want. The U.S., and I always go over this when we talk about the Houthis and Yemen, and it's really important context. It's usually missing, if you read a story about this. The scale of the war that the U.S. backed, the Saudi-UAE war in Yemen, just the destruction, really heavy airstrikes of civilian infrastructure, a barbaric siege similar to what we see in Gaza. According to the UN's count, which is considered a low estimate, at least 377,000 people were killed from 2015 to 2022. To the end of 2021 is when that count goes to. And more than half of those people starved to death or died of disease. And it's, more than half are children under the age of 5. Just really horrific war. And during that time, the Houthis just got better at being able to hit the Saudis. And the reason why the Saudis ended up making peace with them, agreeing to a ceasefire, was because the Houthis were able to really hit their oil infrastructure. And right now, the peace deal to really cement peace in Yemen, cement peace between the Houthis and the Saudis, is being blocked. It hasn't been implemented yet. It's being blocked by U.S. sanctions that have been imposed with all this stuff going on. So we'll see how this goes. Again, the Houthis, they'll stop if there's a ceasefire. A ceasefire in Gaza is the thing that will cool tensions across the region. But it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. All right, the next one here. The U.S. criticizes the ICJ ruling on Israeli occupation. So another big thing that happened on Friday, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, delivered a ruling on the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, and determined that it was illegal and that it must end immediately. And of course, the U.S., which they claim to oppose settlements and everything and want a two-state solution, they weren't too happy with this ICJ ruling, and they criticized it, claiming that it impedes a two-state solution. So a State Department spokesperson told Reuters, quote, "We are concerned that the breadth of the court's opinion will complicate efforts to resolve the conflict and bring about an urgently needed, just and lasting peace, with two states living side by side in peace and security," end quote. The spokesperson also said the ICJ ruling, which was a non-binding opinion, was, quote, "inconsistent with the established framework," end quote. So in contrast, so you see the U.S. condemning this ruling. Do you remember just last week, the Israeli Knesset passed a resolution saying that they oppose the creation of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan. So that covers all the Palestinian territory. And the State Department was asked about that, and they said, oh, that's Israeli, that's up to the Israeli Knesset. That's not our business. This is Vedant Patel. He said, quote, "I'll let Israeli officials speak to their own legislative chamber and the actions that the chamber takes," end quote. And he was actually kind of grilled on this by Matt Lee, the AP reporter. He said, and then at one point, Patel said, "Oh, I don't think any of us here are experts on the Israeli legislation process, so we don't really know, all the details, blah, blah, blah." And I think it was Matt Lee who said, "Well, you don't know the detail. You're not an expert of Georgia's politics, yet you strongly criticized Georgia's parliament when they passed that foreign agents law." He pointed to something else. I think Uganda's anti-gay law. And with Israel, though, they're like, oh, it's their own business. But again, it's just this false narrative that Biden, the Biden administration, the U.S., is working toward a two-state solution when you have the entire Israeli government saying, no, we're not going to do that. And then I just, the ICJ ruling really targeted the settlements, saying that they're illegal, they're illegitimate. I mean, they're saying the occupation must end. That would mean dismantling the settlements, which you have 500,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And then I just mentioned the story, how the settlements and the Israeli land grabs, the terrorist attacks, the settler terrorist attacks, I mean, that's what they are, have really ramped up since October 7th. All right, so the next one here, Israeli settlers beat foreign volunteers in the occupied West Bank. This story is from AFP. It's at the Daily Mail website, which is just, they got so many ads. But anyway, Israeli settlers on Sunday attacked a group of foreign volunteers helping Palestinian farmers in the occupied West Bank, injuring some who needed hospital treatment, the activists and Israeli army said. 8 mainly American volunteers were working with the farmers in an olive grove near the Palestinian village of Kusra when settlers came after them, said David Hummel, an American German in the group. He said, quote, "We were standing there peacefully, not a threat to anyone, when they started coming towards us and pushing us down the path. They started attacking and beating us all with sticks and metal pipes, and they were throwing rocks at us as well at us. I was attacked on my legs and my arm and here on my jaw as well, and it was very violent," end quote. So this is something that happens to Palestinians all the time. Palestinian farmers, when they're harvesting or working their fields, settlers will just, kind of descend on them and attack them. And they don't care, if there's Americans with them or whatnot. This goes to show this is a group of mainly Americans who they just attacked. All right, so the next one here, Johnson says backing Israel is an American founding principle. So this is really something here from House Speaker Mike Johnson. He described U.S. support for Israel as one of America's founding principles during a speech at an event hosted by the Republican Jewish Committee on July 18th. So this was Thursday. They had this event going at the same time as the RNC. So Johnson said, quote, "It is an important principle that America and Israel stand together resolutely. That is part of who we are as a country. It's one of our founding principles. I believe that we maintain peace through strength, and I think that the relationship with Israel is essential to who we are as Americans," end quote. So Israel, the modern state of Israel, was created in 1948. So I don't know what he's talking about when he says the U.S.-Israel relationship, U.S. support for Israel is one of America's founding principles. It's completely ridiculous. And of course, the most well-known founding fathers would also disagree with Johnson, since they strongly warned against permanent alliances and attachments to other nations. And I cited, George Washington's farewell address when he really warned about entangling alliances, permanent alliances. And his quote about, I always thought this was really interesting, what he calls passionate attachments to other countries. He warns really strongly about that, how that can lead to certain things that you see happening today with the U.S. and Israel dynamic, even maybe the U.S.-Ukraine dynamic. I'll just read it. I have this quote here from his farewell address. So he said, quote, "A passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one that enmities of the other betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate inducement or justification," end quote. So it makes one country a participant in the quarrels and wars of the other. And what quarrels and wars are we involved in? Israel's, of course. Johnson also threatened Democratic lawmakers with possible arrest if they protest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress, which is scheduled for this Thursday. This is another thing that these passionate attachments can lead to, is an American politician who's supposed to be looking out for American interests and the interest of his constituents is threatening to arrest his colleagues on behalf of a foreign leader. He said, quote, "There's a number of Democrats in the House who have said they are going to boycott the event, and then some others are going to protest. We're going to have extra sergeants at arms on the floor, and if anybody gets out of hand, the Speaker of the House will bang the gavel. We're going to arrest people if we have to do it. We're going to get the message out, end quote. So there you go. And it also makes American politicians say they want to deport American college students for protesting this one particular foreign nation that they love so much. All right, the next one here, Israel to send a delegation to hostage talks with new demands. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is sending a delegation for a new round of hostage deal negotiations this Thursday, and his office announced this on Sunday. And so the Israeli negotiators, they skipped talks last week. Apparently the U.S. was not happy about that. And according to Israeli media, what they were doing was adding new clauses to the ceasefire proposal, which include all these demands Netanyahu's been making. I'll just go over this briefly because I've been kind of just covering this a lot. But basically, this includes the demand that Israel maintain control of the Gaza-Egypt border and that they have a screening mechanism for the Palestinians returning to North Gaza, which would mean checkpoints that they would have to go through to get back up there. Israel previously agreed to allow the free movement of Palestinians to North Gaza, but he reversed that concession. And this is, these demands are Netanyahu's attempt to sabotage the talks. This has been reported by all Israeli media on all ends of the political spectrum. It's no secret. And so Thursday, the negotiations, that's after Netanyahu's address to Congress. His address to Congress is scheduled for Wednesday. I believe he might meet with Biden on Monday. So, and his office said that Biden dropping out, doesn't change plans for his meeting. I wonder if he's going to try to meet with Trump while he's in D.C. Probably not, but anyway, so he's saying they're sending negotiators. They're going to have all these new demands, and we're seeing more and more Israeli officials call on Netanyahu to reach a deal. The latest is Herzi Halevi, who's the Israeli Defense Forces chief of staff, that he's the head of the Israeli military. During a security cabinet meeting last week, according to Israeli media, he called for an agreement with Hamas. And he also said there would be nothing preventing Israel from returning to fighting in Gaza, which he's saying, we can restart this thing. We just need, this is the only way to get the hostages. And the Israeli military needs a rest, especially if they're going to prepare for war in Lebanon. So, but that's not going to stop Biden from hosting him at the White House. I think now with Biden being like a lame duck, a very, very lame duck, all that pressure, that we have talked about from the kind of progressive wing of the Democratic Party about Israel, Gaza, it already didn't seem to matter as much because there's all this other focus with election stuff now. But now, that's just completely out the window. And we'll see. It's not clear yet if Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee or not. There's a lot of things could still happen. It's only July. November is a long way off. All right. So the next one here, searching for Gaza's missing children. So this article is from 972 magazine, which is an Israeli outlet. So this is about families searching through rubble for their children. Not, in the immediate aftermath of a strike, but months and months later, just to find their remains so they could have a proper funeral and burial for them. So it's really rough. I'm just going to read the first part here. They get into some of the numbers about the missing people, the missing children. So every day for the past 7 months, 28-year-old Anas Juha and his surviving relatives have visited the ruins of their family home in the hope of finding the remains of their missing loved ones. So every day for the past 7 months, they've returned to these buildings, these ruins, to try to find the remains. On December 6th, a single Israeli airstrike crushed their 5-story building in Gaza City's Al-Fayoumi neighborhood, killing 117 members of the family. 57 bodies were recovered and identified. 60 others have remained trapped under the debris ever since. By sheer coincidence, Anas had left his wife and children at home that morning while they ate breakfast in order to run an errand at his father's house nearby. Upon hearing the powerful blast, he rushed back to check on his family and was horrified to find only a cloud of smoke and dust. He said, quote, "The whole building was reduced to rubble. All I could think about was the 140 people inside," end quote. He began desperately searching for his family together with his wounded cousins, Mohammed and Naji, who had survived the strike after the force of the explosion propelled them out of the collapsed building. They conducted the initial search and rescue efforts without the help of Gaza's civil defense. They had no way to contact Gaza's civil defense, so they didn't get there until like much later in the day. So again, just the people who were killed in the rubble who weren't taken out of the rubble include his wife and their 2 children, 5-year-old Kariman and 3-year-old Fayez. So his 5-year-old and 3-year-old children and his wife are still haven't found their remains. So to get into some of the numbers here, and then decaying corpses. So just gets into how, they find them in very advanced stages of decay when they do find these bodies that have been trapped under there. So the international, they say Anis's family are among thousands of Palestinians recorded as missing in Gaza since October 7th, the majority of whom are thought to be trapped dead or alive under destroyed buildings and whose bodies have not been registered at arriving hospitals. The International Committee of the Red Cross has received inquiries regarding more than 8,700 cases. 3/4 of them remain unresolved. And Gaza's health ministry estimates the total number of missing persons to be even higher, around 10,000. And this is not incorporated into the ministry's overall death toll from Israel's bombardment, which currently stands at more than 38,000. So just a lot of people missing and stuck under the rubble. And again, just imagine that, returning to the site of where your family was killed just to find a piece of them so you could have a proper burial. All right, the next one here. Gaza hospital says newborn saved from dead mother's womb. This article is from AFP. So this was a strike over the weekend. Doctors in Gaza described delivering a newborn baby against incredible odds on Saturday, pulling him from his mother's womb moments after she died of wounds sustained in an Israeli airstrike. It's not the first story like this that I've read. This has happened before. At 9 months pregnant, Ola Adan Harb al-Kurd managed to survive just long enough to reach Al-Adha Hospital in central Gaza after an overnight strike hit her home in the Nusret refugee camp, medics said. Emergency department doctors rushed into action when they saw the heavily pregnant woman arrive in critical condition. So she was alive, almost dead, and then she died, but they were able to save the baby. And she was 9 months pregnant, so the baby was born in critical condition, but has been stabilized. There is an emergency C-section was performed. Now they are, with all the shortages and everything, newborn babies have the risk of dying, just the lack of nutrition. So hopefully this one survives, because I remember one of those stories of a baby being cut out of a dead woman. The baby didn't survive after a while. That was premature. I think that was like 7 months. So hopefully this one lives. And that was on Saturday. And then the next one here, Israel's latest airstrikes in Gaza kill at least 15, including children. This is one from AP, just kind of a summary of some of the strikes on Gaza. This was Saturday into Sunday. So Israeli airstrikes killed at least 15 people, including women and children, overnight in Gaza, according to hospital officials and a body count by an Associated Press journalist on Sunday. So AP has journalists that go into the hospitals and count how many dead bodies they see. And I believe this included 8 children, and there was a 5-month-old baby who was killed as well in these strikes. So the bombing, hasn't stopped. And this comes as there's all this worry. There's the discovery of the polio virus in the sewage there in Gaza, polio. So they're worried about that spreading. And, people are just living among trash and all this stuff. So disease is really spreading and everything. So just, of course, it sounds like a stupid thing to say, but of course the situation just continues to get worse and worse and worse as this thing goes on. All right, the next one here. Trump talks with Zelensky, says he will end war. So former President Donald Trump said Friday that he spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and said he would work to end the war in Ukraine. Trump wrote on Truth Social, his social media platform, Quote, I appreciate President Zelensky for reaching out because I, as your next president of the United States, will bring peace to the world and end the war that has cost so many lives and devastated countless innocent families. Both sides will be able to come together and negotiate a deal that ends the violence and paves a path forward to prosperity, end quote. So this conversation came after Trump was formally nominated as a Republican presidential candidate. Zelensky's office said that he congratulated him on the nomination and everything, and condemned the assassination attempt on Trump. And the two leaders agreed, quote, to discuss in a personal meeting what steps can be taken to restore a just peace for Ukraine as soon as possible, end quote. So Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, has also said that he favors a peace deal in Ukraine so the U.S. can focus on building up around China, which he has called the biggest threat facing the U.S., and that is an opinion shared by the Pentagon. One interesting thing is that there is a poll that shows a plurality of Ukrainians are ready for negotiations. It was conducted by a Ukrainian news site, and it found that 44% of Ukrainians in areas behind the front lines believe it is time to start peace talks, while 35% are opposed to the idea and 21% are undecided. So hopefully peace talks happen. I mean, this is something that just needs to come to an end. With Trump and Biden, I almost wrote this whole thing in this story about kind of the difference in what they're saying about Ukraine on their campaign trail, but I didn't think it looked good, so I got rid of it. And then it was good because it would have been a waste, since I found out right after I published it that Biden was not campaigning anymore. But some context, when it comes to Trump, it's good to mention when he was president, he did escalate U.S. involvement in Ukraine. He was the first to send the Javelin anti-tank missiles. He signed off on the first shipment in 2017. In 2019, he got impeached for delaying a shipment for like a month and a half. That whole mess. But again, it seems like he's running on this, making peace in Ukraine. So hopefully, I don't think, unfortunately, you can't take these types of promises. We have to just wait and see if it happens. And then some people have mentioned and said, oh, you should be covering, RFK Jr.'s positions. And I know this is something he has really prioritized is making peace in Ukraine as well. I'm not sure if this is how this is going to affect him, which Biden dropping out. And I know he's, they're fighting to get ballot access. That's what his campaign is really focusing on. But RFK Jr., peace in Ukraine is a big thing for him. And then, unfortunately, he's bad on Gaza and Israel. Anyway, the next one here, Russian fighter jets intercept U.S. strategic bombers over the Arctic. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. 2 American B-52 bombers flying in the direction of Russia were turned away by Moscow's fighter jets, one of the U.S.'s primary strategic aircraft. B-52s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. On Sunday, Washington ordered 2 long-range bombers to conduct operations near the Russian border from Finnish airspace. The Kremlin reported that MiG-29 and MiG-35 fighters turned back the American aircraft. So this interception in the Arctic, we might start seeing more of this. And because Finland and Sweden just joined, and they're near the Arctic. This is, I believe, over the Barents Sea that this happened. So this is something the U.S. is really, and NATO are trying to increase their military presence up in the Arctic, and I think we're probably going to see more of this. All right, so the next one here, China and the Philippines reach a deal on the disputed Shoal. So the Philippines said on Sunday that it reached a deal with China to reduce tensions around Second Thomas Shoal, a Philippine-occupied reef in the South China Sea that's also claimed by China, Vietnam, and Taiwan. Manila did not disclose any details about the deal, but said it would allow the resupply of the BRP Sierra Madre, a World War II-era ship the Philippines grounded on the reef in 1999 and uses as a base of operations for the area. So these encounters and incidents that sometimes end in collision, they've really increased over the past couple years. And they happen when the Philippines tries to supply this ship. So they're saying they reached a deal on being able to resupply it, But kind of weird that they're not putting out any details. And I haven't seen confirmation from China yet, but hopefully this is true and, things de-escalate here, because there's a big risk of this turning into something big, because whenever these things happen, you have the U.S. come out and say, that they back the Philippines, that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea. So it's totally, it's a flashpoint for potential war between the U.S. and China. And there was an agreement, as far as I understand it. Duterte, the former Philippine president, was pretty friendly with China, and he had kind of an unwritten agreement. Just there was a status quo around Second Thomas Shoal and other disputed reefs, where they, when it comes to fishing and things like that. And this came out earlier this year. China said that there was an unwritten agreement that the Philippines is now violating, that Marcos, the new president, is now violating. And Duterte was asked about it, and he kind of said, no, I didn't agree to any deal that conceded any of the Philippines' sovereignty. But, we did have a status quo. Me and the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, did agree, to avoid war and maintain the status quo. And he was asked, because one thing China has said is if the Philippines only delivers, food and water and other basic supplies to this ship, and that's okay. They also said they want the right to inspect the boats, but I don't know if the Philippines would go for that. But apparently this status quo involved that they just delivered basic things and not construction materials. That was the thing. China doesn't want them to build anything on this shoal or reinforce this ship that's really rusted out and dilapidated. But anyway, so we don't know the details. Maybe they'll come out. We'll see what China says about this during the week. Hopefully, things cool down. But that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Haaretz: Israel's continued denial of the reality of the occupation will be its ruin. One from James W. Carden and Douglas McGregor: Neoconservatism by another name. One from Stephen Bryan: Why is NATO expanding its nuclear forces? One from Nan Levinson: Assessing the flames of Gaza protests. And one from Mark Perrymutter and Feroz Sidhwa: We volunteered at a Gaza hospital. What we saw was unspeakable. That's really, they wrote this in Politico, accounts from surgeons who volunteered in Gaza. We were just talking about this the other day. Just really horrific scenes. I mean, about children and the conditions they're in, when they're brought into hospitals. Just really tough stuff to read. But go check that out. Go check out the blog and all that stuff. Hope everyone had a good weekend. If you want to support this show, like and subscribe on YouTube. You can comment also on Odyssey and Rumble. Follow me on X. Follow antiwar.com over there. Follow us on Instagram as well. I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.